What are you doing to change the world?
It's really such a simple question, yet when you think of it, it's really difficult to answer.
There's so many issues in our world today, things like depression and despair, hunger, starvation, climate change, and the list can go on and on. I'm sure all of you can think of many more ideas.
Yet most people don't think they're going to change the world. Why is that? A couple years ago on the bus, I'm coming to school, I started asking people this question in the morning. What are you doing to change the world? I got some interesting responses. People were somewhat confused why this random person was asking them this question at 8 in the morning. But I did get some good answers. Some people said, I'm going to love more. Or, I'm going to help out wherever I can.
But by far the most common answer I got was, I'm not going to change the world. It's too big for me. It's too much for me to handle. What does that say about our society when, despite the fact that we recognize all these changes, most people don't think they're going to change the world? Today I want to highlight what I see as 3 barriers for this. 3 barriers that stop people from changing the world. As well as an idea that a bunch of us are working on to hopefully help overcome some of these barriers.
Barrier number 1. Changing the world is simply too big, and we are too small. Changing the world is for those larger-in-life characters, people like Mother Teresa and Mahatma Gandhi, and we are regular, ordinary. I'm definitely not a Mother Teresa, I'm just Derek. How can I possibly hope to challenge some of the problems and work to change some of the problems that are so immense? What can I do?
I think, though, that we forget that people like Martin Luther King, who we see as amazing people, are just like us. Before there's this Martin Luther King Jr., there's this young man named Martin. And Martin, he had hopes and dreams, but he also had lots of fears and insecurities. He was enamored with the amazing people who came before him, like a Mahatma Gandhi, and completely overwhelmed by the problems of his day. It is this Martin Luther King that I think we should think about, because this is a Martin Luther King who I think we can connect with and realize and see ourselves in, which is so important. So barrier number 1, changing the world is simply too big, and we're simply too small. Barrier number 2, we're simply too busy. I mean, think about it. We have a hard enough time, I know I do, staying on top of my own life, to imagine tackling the problems of the world. And I've got family, friends, work, school, and I must admit, this is just from one class, let alone all the others. I have tons of chores at home. This is a picture of my dishes from last night. I got halfway through them, and then I went to bed. We're so difficult. Like it's so difficult to keep on top of these things. We're trying to figure out who we are. We're trying to pay the bills, and then of course we have all those other distractions like TV and of course Facebook. With all these things, how can we possibly think of finding time to make the world better? It's difficult. I think, though, when we look back at history and we see change, we see it in its entirety. And it seems absolutely massive. I mean, take, for example, the end of apartheid in South Africa. This took decades. You could even argue a century or more. And when we think of this, we think of Nelson Mandela. Now, Nelson Mandela is an amazing person, for sure. But the end of apartheid was so much more than Nelson Mandela. The end of apartheid was made up of millions of people all over the world who were making choices in their everyday lives. These choices, these interactions, over decades, culminated in the end of apartheid in South Africa. These people are just like you and I. They have families, they have friends. They're trying to pay the bills. They probably have giant heaps of dishes at home sometimes. These are the people who are just like you and I. And it is these people who are responsible for the end of apartheid in South Africa. So, barrier number 2. We are simply too busy. Barrier number 3, which I think is probably the simplest. We don't talk about it. Think about it. Where do we talk about changing the world? Where do we talk about making the world better, other than at TED? At home? At school? At work? Hanging out with friends? If not in these places, where do we talk about it? How many people have seen the movie Paying It Forward? Oh wow, pretty good. Number 3. At the beginning of the movie, the teacher gives his students a challenge. He challenges them to come up with a project to tackle a problem they see in the world. Who has had a teacher who's challenged them like this? And teachers, how many of you have challenged your students with a project like this? Why is this not happening more often? What is more important than trying to make the world better? And think about it. Friend, when you hang out with your family, parents, are you challenging your kids? Are you encouraging your kids to take their gifts and use them to make the world better? And kids, are you challenging your parents? Saying, Mom, Dad, you have all these great skills. What are you doing to make the future better for me and my children? Why are we not asking these questions? And think of it, when you're hanging with friends, what do we talk about? Relationships? What's on TV? Sports? I mean, I love my Leafs, but what is more important? The Leafs game last night that I don't really want to talk about? Or issues of hunger in my community? Where should my priorities be? And what should I be talking about with my friends? Alright, so I just highlighted 3 barriers. Can anyone tell me what they are? Shout it out.
Too busy.
We're too busy. Good. What's another one?
Too small.
We're too small and changing the world is too big. And the final one? We don't talk about it. 3 barriers that are stopping us from changing the world. This past fall, on a bus trip from Toronto, I had a conversation with a professor. I don't really remember what we talked about. It was actually probably economics. But what I do remember is after that conversation, I had this idea. I then shared it with a couple of my friends. See? Talking with your friends about changing the world. And they brought their own flavors to it. And we decided to go for it. The idea is really quite simple. Let's take changing the world from this giant thing that seems so much beyond us and make it something that any of us could do. Let's take changing the world from being this thing that's a huge sacrifice, a huge commitment on our time that none of us could possibly hope to achieve, and make it something that we could intertwine into our daily lives, our daily choices. And most importantly, let's create a space for us to talk about changing the world, to share ideas and learn from each other. And that's where the We Change the World group got started. Like I said, the idea is fairly simple, fairly obvious when you think about it. We encourage people to think of an idea, something that you're already probably doing in your lives, something simple that anyone could do, like the free hugs video you saw at the beginning. Or maybe opening the door for someone, or inviting someone over for tea. Little tiny things that make the world better. We decided to find changing the world as moving the world towards greater health, happiness, equality, sustainability, and community. We ask you to answer 4 questions in 1 minute. Who are you? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And how is this action, or this choice, changing the world? Most importantly, though, this is a story about you. We want people to take ownership over their ideas and tell them from that place that is them telling a story to all of us, so we can learn from each other. We then take these videos, post them on our website, and share them with the world. And we encourage them to share it through Facebook or Twitter, whatever means you have. Get people talking about your idea and trying to incorporate it into their lives. But also ask them, what are you doing to change the world? I think sometimes we're overwhelmed by the size of changing the world, and it seems so immense, so time-consuming, that we don't think we can do it. But changing the world isn't about giants and super actions that are huge. Changing the world is about the simple day-to-day things that we do in our lives, the interactions, and how they influence those around us. And it's when these culminate together that real change happens. An ordinary man
once said, "My life is my message."
Well, this is my life. And this is the message that me and my friends are trying to tell the world.
What message will your life tell people? This is what we are doing to change the world. What are you doing to change the world?